Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be doing our presentation on women's roles in Greek life, particularly through the study of Spartan and Athenian women. So let's get started. So Spartan women, unlike women in the rest of the Greek world in places such as Athens, had a lot more opportunities in areas such as education, where Sparta was known to have not just an education system for boys but girls as well. So although Athenian and other Greek policies did have education their for females, it was done privately through their parents' needs and not through the state or the polis themselves. And all this extra time that women had in education while the boys were spending it in like the agoge and military training led to a lot of historians arguing that it led to a more culturally and strategically smarter group of women in Sparta, with even Plato himself praising their philosophical skills, which is exampled here on the slide, where he mentions not only men but women who also pride themselves on education. Spartan women also had a lot of opportunities in athletics and events such as racing, wrestling, discus throwing, and they even participated in hunts. They were also famous for a dance called the babassus, which kind of required you to jump in the air and smack your heels on your butt in like a competition. An example of a figurine is on the side of the slide. Also, women were more so involved in the equestrian culture, which involved riding, driving, or competing in horse-related events. And the first female star in the Greek Olympics was actually a Spartan equestrian named Siniska, and a statue of her and her horses was created and kept in a sanctuary with the inscription that is included on the slide as well. The opportunities that Spartan women had really shows in their accumulation of wealth, where we see that women in Sparta often had equal opportunities at being members of the elite, just like men, with an example of one of the Spartan kings, Aegeus IV, wanting to institute reforms around 244 BC, but it required the help of two of the wealthiest people in Sparta, his own mother and grandmother, which really shows how much wealth and power the elite women at this point in Spartan history really had. And they really had full control over their own property, making their own independent choices on things like remarriage. And even here with a quote from Aristotle, we see that at this time, women had so much wealth that they owned nearly 2/5 of land in Laconia.
Women's experience in Athens was significantly different from women in Sparta and other parts of ancient Greece. In terms of education, while Athenian men were encouraged to pursue a higher education concentrated in the art of rhetoric, women were encouraged to learn from their mothers on how to maintain a household in order to make a good wife. Athenian men valued the ability to deliver persuasive speeches and admired men who were competent in this area but preferred women to stay silent, uneducated, and submissive. They also preferred women to stay indoors and not participate in physical activity, while men were given physical education for the purpose of providing Athens with strong soldiers. Even though Athenian women filled an essential role in Athenian society, their work was often looked down upon by men due to the nature of the work being similar to that of slaves. Some daily duties that a typical Athenian woman would carry out include caring for children, watching over slaves, and even nursing them if they were sick, spinning and weaving, and preparing food. Women's work in Athens varied based on social class. Wealthier women took on more of a managerial role instead of performing all of the domestic work, and according to Xenophon's Oikonomicus, it was the husband's responsibility to teach his wife how to manage a household. Poorer women sometimes worked outside of their house and were employed as washerwomen, wool workers, nurses, and midwives. Although Athenian women often worked, they never made a great amount of money and were not legally allowed to buy or sell any land. All of their property was managed by their male guardians, which would be either their husband, father, or male family member.
The role of motherhood in Sparta was really unique compared to the rest of the Greek polities. Since Spartan children often grew up with their fathers away in their formative years, women such as mothers, sisters, and nurses were the principal, if not the sole influence in the creation of these Spartan citizens. But with that being said, mothers were known to be really strong and distant with their children, which could have been a cultural impact of the infanticide that was forced upon them pretty much. And we get an example of this with the story of Theano, the mother of Pausanias we learned about. And the story is that when her son was seeking asylum in a building, part of a sanctuary of Athena, Theano didn't plead for his life. Instead, she put a brick at the temple of the door and then just left. And following her example, Ephors also continued to pile bricks and just left him inside. We get a lot of examples like these types of relationships between Spartan mothers and sons. We've referenced a few in class, like the soldier returning from Crete, whose mother was saying, like, why did you return, type of thing. And then we also get, kind of becomes such like a common theme that even in the 18th century we get paintings of it, like the one that included here, where it's titled "Bring Back Your Shield" or "Let the Shield Bring You Back." Really goes to show how impactful it was. The system of marriage was also really unique in Sparta, since Spartan women, unlike other women in Greek polises, didn't have to leave their homes and lose their virginity at the same time. This practice of secret marriage that we had discussed before, where the man sneaks in and out, is really kind of helpful because it's pretty much done until they become pregnant or choose to get married. It made this transition like a lot easier. And there was also a marriage system in Sparta of husband doubling and wife sharing that really improved not only the women's lives by having dominance in two separate oikos, but also increased their economic status of their own children. And we get an excerpt from Xenophon, which I included, where we see how the system benefit the state in situations where older men are told to let their wives procreate with the younger Spartan men.
The woman's father served as her guardian until he passed her down to her husband after marriage. Upon marriage, the woman's father would provide the husband with a dowry, which is property or money, for her maintenance. Divorces were common and not looked down upon in Athens. If the man initiated the divorce, the woman would simply be returned to her previous guardian, but if the woman wished to divorce, she would need either her father or another male citizen to speak for her before the archon. Once divorced, the woman must be returned with her dowry that can be potentially given to her next husband in another marriage. Women were typically married around the age of 14, while men typically married at age 30. This large age difference and difference in education levels led to marriages that were not considered close, loving friendships as they are today. In fact, men enjoyed their relationships with other men much more since they had more in common, but saw their relationships with women as necessary. This quote by Aristotle addresses this sentiment. In Eudemian Ethics, Book 7, Aristotle says, "But opposite is dear to opposite on the score of utility. For the like is useless to itself, and therefore master needs slave, and slave master, man and wife need one another." One of the main reasons Athenians valued marriage was because they placed importance on producing children. Women began having children shortly after marriage and in their lifetime typically had around 5 or 6 children. Because they began having children at such a young age, they were subject to more complications during childbirth, which is why Athenians saw an increase in female deaths during childbearing years. Because pregnancy and childbirth was hard on women, they often made offerings in gratitude to the goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia. Once a child was born, women were given different rations of food depending on the gender of their baby. If she had a boy, she would be given twice as much food than if she had a girl. One of the only public gatherings women were allowed to participate in were religious ceremonies. At some of these events, women were allowed to mingle with men, which is a stark contrast from their day to day life. One of these festivals is the Panathenea, which is celebrated annually by women and men on the birthday of Athena. Women were involved in the sacrificial offerings of animals, and the Knephoroi, which are young virgin girls, were responsible for carrying sacred baskets in the procession. Other ceremonies include the mysteries of Demeter and Kore at Eleusis. These were performed in honor of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Kore or Persephone. Women, men, children, and slaves were allowed to participate in these rituals, but only women participated in the Charophoria, which translates to the bearing of the sacred vessels. Women also performed sacred dances during these ceremonies. The Thesmophoria was another festival honoring Demeter that was reserved only for free women. This festival lasted 3 days. The first day, women went into subterranean caves to retrieve the remains of pigs and mix them with seed grain and place them on altars. On the second day, women fasted sitting on the ground, mimicking Demeter when she lost her daughter. On the third day, the remains of the pigs and seed grain were scattered into the fields. Athenian men seemed to recognize women for their role in religious practices by allowing them to perform these rituals, but seemed to lack appreciation for women in any other aspect of society.
That is the end of our presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.